When you see someone like George who's able to kind of hold on to that beauty and just explode at the end of his life, makes me feel positive about human nature.
Every day I would walk from my home in South Beach through Flamingo Park, and I centered myself around 10th Street and Ocean Drive. No cars, no traffic. Walk around the beach, walk around Loomis Park, Ocean Drive. People sitting in their benches in front of every porch. Youngest person there by 30 or 40 or 50 years. At that time, the hotels were whitewashed, all the same. There was no glamour. And I look up, and there's one room in the Colony Hotel. It was a premier room right on either side of the beautiful marquee, full of decorations. Door opens, this little old stooped over man with a crew cut and a goatee beckons me to come in. Doesn't speak a lot of English. He's just sweet, pleasant, had a natural grace about himself. I just fell in love with him, and I went back for years.
This show is an introduction to the work of George Voronovsky, someone who was producing work throughout the 1970s and early 80s, and who is largely unknown.
I've long been interested in outsider and vernacular art made by untrained artists. And I think that stems from my having grown up in Miami Beach during a very opulent era. And I started collecting. George's room was an explosion of color and life. Wherever you looked, there were decorations and paintings. Literally in this little room, there was probably 9 by 12 feet, 5,000 objects.
He was really just taking walks all around South Beach and finding post-consumer, post-war capitalist society trash. He was gathering it and turning it into this exceptional universe.
Candy wrappers fashioned into flowers, soda cans carved into stars bursting in these explosive arrangements.
As far as we know, George wasn't really looking to other painters. He was never apprenticed with anybody. He was truly somebody who was making art from his own vision and through his own experimentation. That's something that's very typical of self-taught artists, is that they're not just painting on canvas or sculpting in stone or wood. In George's case, he was transforming a myriad of materials that he found throughout South Beach. The kinds of boxes that flotational, fun rafts and those sorts of things came in. Old pieces of cardboard from pizza boxes. And then he amazingly was able to carve styrofoam.
Outsider artists are untrained, usually eccentric. They don't follow the rules, they don't care about tradition. Color is not a matter of theory, but of fun. And they create generally because they have some urges, some deeply seated urges to explore and express.
The more that we looked at the paintings, the more that we kind of identified architectures and flora and fauna, the more that we realized almost all of these paintings are of childhood memories from the Ukraine, maybe from Crimea.
George was a memory painter, and he painted his recollections of growing up in Kiev. His father was an attorney. They were cultured people. He plays instruments, he writes, and he paints. After World War II, he lost his family. His wife divorced him while he was in a concentration camp. But what we're learning now that it might have been to save him, because his return could have gotten him killed under Stalin's regime. He comes to Philadelphia, works on the railroad, washing dishes, cleaning cars, belongs to the Tolstoy Foundation. One of his hobbies when he had time off was to get on a Greyhound bus and go anywhere with this little camera, film through the windows, walk through gardens. Always dreamt his Miami Beach is paradise. He was positive. Everything was positive. His was a beautiful world in spite of his hardships.
He was one of hundreds of thousands of refugees of World War II who wound up in South Beach in Miami in the second half of the 20th century.
That was, in fact, the last resort for a Jewish culture who survived Nazi Germany, the Holocaust, filtered through Ellis Island, New England, and they found South Beach as a community where they can practice their mores and traditions.
This re-identification with childhood joy was his way of kind of recuperating the trauma that he'd experienced in his life. He did do this one painting over and over again, and it was a memory of him and his brothers finding snake skins and eggshells in the forests of eastern Ukraine as children. And they did it, as he described in the title, to preserve the beauty of nature. What he was able to achieve on the surfaces of these paintings is just so incredibly remarkable. On all different kinds of surfaces, kind of found cardboard and sometimes canvas board or canvas and different kinds of pigments. For many years, he was kind of watering down store-bought pigments that he got at the Woolworth 5 and dime to make them last longer.
I had an idea to write a grant for him. I submitted this grant, and sure enough, he gets it. It's $3,000. It's a lot of money in late 70s. We took him to Rex Art. Coral Gables was a premier art store at the time. And I said, George, here's a wagon, take your time. I said, fill it up. And I come back in an hour and there's canvases and acrylics and brushes. So that was a second life for him as an artist.
Dancers and Fireworks is my favorite piece of George's, and it's sort of two paintings in one. Well, the lower half is comprised of these dancers surrounded by ballerinas. The top half of the painting is sort of full of symbols from Ukrainian and Slavic folklore. Right across the center is a mythological firebird. There are designs that evoke pizanki, the egg decorating tradition of Ukraine. There are other motifs that you would see in Ukrainian embroidery.
One of my favorite works in the show is a beautiful painting of this luxurious cruise ship kind of skimming along the water. And we think it's probably something that he did see from his view where he was living in South Beach. I think he has a special kind of identification with birds because of what happened to him in terms of his separation from his family. Animals just run wild and free in all of his art, but birds are really this kind of constant motif throughout.
When I met George that first time, it wasn't that I knew that I was just with someone special. It was more of almost an intuitive or innate attraction to this guy. I had brought my girlfriend, Teresa, and she fell in love with George too, and he fell in love with her. We visited him, I'd say 2 to 3 times a week. We took him onto the cruise ships. He would sit in the back. I guess he would just dream. He just had a wonderful time. We just loved him. He was part of the family. His health started to fail. I had a friend who worked at Rebecca Towers, which was one of 2 HUD housings for elderly and poorer people, and she let him move in. And it was on the bay, so of course he had a view of the port of Miami, and he was high up and he got a nice panorama, so he was very happy there. But he was a little nervous, and he said to me, "Can I hang my artwork up?" I said, "Of course you can." He lived there until he passed away. He died at Mount Sinai Hospital. We packed up the paintings and the decorations, and we've been serving as guardians of this work for 40 years. We raised 2 children, and I taught college before I got to retirement and having the time to establish George's reputation.
When I first learned of George's work, I was very intrigued. And then COVID happened. I went to see the work in person where Gary had it stored at that time, and that for me was truly a transformational experience. When you see someone like George who's able to kind of hold on to that beauty his whole life, that need to express, and just explode at the end of his life with that kind of artistic impulse, that for me is very restorative. And no matter what else is going on in the world, makes me feel something extremely positive about human nature.
The work itself is unique, it's heartwarming, it's human, it's tender. But so was he.